Welcome to this deep dive. We've got a really interesting topic today, looking at source material that lays out a guide to Russian air defense weapons. Our goal here is pretty straightforward. Take this information, unpack the systems the source mentions, get a feel for what they are, how they work, and maybe how they fit together, using only what's in this guide.
Absolutely. And, just getting a basic handle on these kinds of systems, what they do, their range, their purpose, it really helps make sense of a lot of things you might read about or see. This source is a great starting point.
Okay, let's jump in then. The source calls itself a quick guide, specifically looking at ground and ship-based systems from Russia. It's not claiming to be the definitive list, but it gives us a good window.
Yeah, and what immediately jumps out when you look at what's listed is the sheer variety. It's clearly not just one system doing everything.
Right.
You've got different tools for different jobs, short range, medium, long range, ground-based, ship-based. Some need to move, others protect a fixed spot.
Exactly. So let's try walking through some of the key ones, the source details, pulling out those specific points and seeing what they tell us. And we start with the shorter range point defense types. First one listed is Tor SA-15 Gauntlet, is the NATO name. Been around since '86, apparently. The source highlights its mobility. It's on a tracked vehicle and says it's good at hitting precision missiles, even when conditions aren't great, like bad weather or jamming.
And there's an interesting detail the source points out about how it operates. It can spot targets while it's moving,
Oh, right.
but it actually has to stop just briefly to launch its missiles. But that tells you something about its tactical employment, I suppose. Mobile, but needs that pause.
Yeah, that's a specific detail. And it gives figures for the newer Tor M2 version, range up to 16 kilometers, altitude up to 10 kilometers.
Okay, then slightly different focus, but still in that short to medium bracket, is the Pantsir S1 SA-20 Greyhound. Came along later, 2008 production start.
Another ground system.
Right. And what the source really emphasizes here is its setup. It's got both anti-aircraft guns and surface-to-air missiles on the same vehicle.
That combination seems pretty key, doesn't it? For point defense, like around important sites. The source even says it can run fully automatically.
Exactly that close-in protection role. The source pegs its missile range at about 20 kilometers and altitude ceiling around 15 kilometers.
And this concept extends to ships too, right? The close-in weapon systems, CIWS. The source mentions Kashtan.
Yes, since 1989. Also a gun-missile combo, automatic. But the interesting note here is that it's being replaced
By
the Pantsir M, which, as the name suggests, the source describes as the naval version of the Pantsir S1. So that's becoming the go-to CIWS, taking over from the improved Kashtan M. And the source gives specs for that Kashtan M 10-kilometer missile range, 6-kilometer altitude. So the move to Pantsir M likely represents a step up.
Makes sense. Okay, shifting up a bit in range. Medium range systems.
Right. The source introduces the Buck family here, been in service since 1979. It describes them as, well, a family of medium-range systems that are still a really important part of Russia's air defense setup.
And it's not static. It mentions newer versions like Buck M1-2 and M2, that's the SA-17 Grizzly, and points out that an even newer Buck M3 is still being produced. So ongoing development there.
Definitely suggests it's a core capability they continue to invest in.
Okay, let's scale up again. Long-range systems. The source starts with the S-300 family, describes it as modern, long-range, evolved since the 70s, and the predecessor to the S-400.
And within the S-300, there's quite a bit of variation based on the job. First, the source details the ground-based S-300P, the SA-10 Grumble.
What's unique there?
Well, the source notes its radar setup. The surveillance radars can be positioned way out, like up to 40 kilometers from the actual command post.
Wow.
And those radars can be spread out, too, maybe 80 kilometers apart, so you can cover a really wide area.
That's significant coverage. And the range for the latest version, the S-200 PMU-2 Favorite, or SA-20B.
The source puts that at almost 200 kilometers reach. Pretty substantial.
Then there's another S-300 variant, mentioned the S-300V Anti-300, SA-12 Gladiator Giant. How does that differ?
The source contrasts it with the P version. The V is on track, so it's more mobile. And it apparently uses more passive sensors.
So better for protecting forces on the move.
That's what the source suggests, yeah. Useful for covering mobile army units, that sort of thing.
And the S-300 isn't just land-based. The source lists the naval versions, too.
Right. The S-300F Fort SAN-6 range up to 90 kilometers, and then the improved S-300FM Fort M SAN-20 stretching out to a 150-kilometer range at sea.
Okay, so a whole family of related but distinct systems. And that leads into the S-400.
Exactly. The S-400 Triumph SA-21 Growler.
Yeah.
In service since 2007. The source positions this basically as an improved S-300.
And widely seen as very capable.
Yeah, the source notes it's generally considered one of the top-tier long-range systems out there. A key thing it mentions is the missiles it uses.
Like the 40N6.
Mm-hmm. That one, the source says, has an impressive range up to 400 kilometers. That's a huge bubble.
400 kilometers. Wow. But it's not just about the reach, is it? There's something else the source highlights.
Yes, and this is really interesting. The source states the S-400 system can actually integrate other air defense systems into its command structure.
Like which ones?
It mentions things like the Tor, the Panzer S. Even older S-300 systems can apparently be networked into the S-400's control system.
So it acts like a quarterback for a whole layered defense.
That's the picture the source paints, yeah. Pulling together different systems into one coordinated defense envelope.
Now, before we wrap up the systems, the source does quickly mention a couple of older ones, not in Russian service anymore, but still relevant.
Right. Just briefly, it lists the S-75, that's the old SA-2 guideline from the 50s, and the S-200, SA-5 Gammon from the 60s.
Ancient history in missile terms.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Russia doesn't use them, but the source notes they're still operated by some countries, like Syria, for example.
But here's the really fascinating bit the source adds about the S-200.
What's that?
It mentions that missiles from those old S-200 systems can potentially be integrated into the control systems of the much newer S-300 or S-400.
Now that is interesting. So according to the source, you could potentially use legacy missile stocks within a modern command structure.
Quite a thought. Okay, so let's try and tie this together. We've gone through this quick guide. What does it all tell you, the listener, about how these Russian systems work together?
Well, I think it paints a pretty clear picture of a layered approach. You have specific systems designed for specific jobs, protecting troops on the move, close-in defense of vital sites, covering medium ranges, and then denying huge areas at long ranges. You see this evolution, too, like within the Buck and S-300 families.
Leading up to things like the S-400.
Exactly, leading to these very capable modern systems. And it also hints, like with that S-200 point, about ways to potentially get more mileage out of older equipment by integrating it.
It really is striking just how many different types, different roles, different capabilities are packed into what the source calls a quick guide.
It is. And, thinking about that integration capability, the source mentioning S-200 missiles working with S-300 or S-400, and the S-400 itself pulling in Tor and Panzer.
Yeah.
That whole idea of mixing and matching, combining different generations and types of systems, it kind of leaves you with a question to chew on.
Okay.
What might be the strategic pros or maybe the cons, the logistical headaches, perhaps, of building your air defense network by actively integrating all these varied systems, different capabilities, different ages, instead of aiming for, say, just one uniform, standardized system everywhere? Something to think about.